I spoke with Michael Hudson, author of The Bubble and Beyond, about Fed tapering and the true effect of quantitative easing.
Well, quantitative easing is a kind of government spending, but it's not the kind of government spending that ends up as part of the budget deficit. It's pure money creation that's spent on buying securities from the banks. Mainly they're mortgage-backed securities, including junk mortgages, other bonds. So the idea is to pump money into the banking system. The pretense is that the banks then are going to turn around and lend this money out to the economy, but that's not what's been happening at all. Either the banks have been speculating in foreign arbitrage currencies or foreign loans, or they've been spending it within the financial sector. None of the quantitative easing has really gone into the economy at large. So whereas Keynesian spending is the government is the employer of last resort, in quantitative easing, the government is the buyer of junk mortgages of last resort. When there are no more German banks to buy, there are no more pension funds to buy. Everybody knows that these mortgages are what's called toxic waste. The government is the buyer of toxic waste of last resort.
And so what's going to happen? I mean, the Federal Reserve owns all this Treasury securities, but also all these MBS securities, and they've changed their accounting manual so they don't have to take capital losses. But when interest rates rise, they're still going to be paying interest on excess reserves. $1.7 trillion of this that we have right now. Is it possible that the Fed could go cash flow negative and possibly have to print money in a tightening cycle?
That's exactly what it would have to do. And of course, it can print the money electronically on its computer keyboard ad infinitum. And essentially, this is just a bookkeeping operation. It can do that as a subsidy to the banks. And all of this paying interest on bank reserves is simply for a subsidy. So the government will lend money to the banks at a low interest. The banks earn a higher interest from the Federal Reserve. It's a pure giveaway. It's the proverbial free lunch.
Well, and let's talk about these MBS securities, because this basically relates to the housing market. And recently we've seen housing prices rise and the stock market hit all-time highs. Has this been a direct effect of these QE programs? I mean, has this been a true housing recovery?
No. Let's look at the housing market.
Sure.
It's fundamentally changed. Now that the Federal Reserve has pushed down interest rates to 1% on government securities, you have all of these bondholders and the cash-rich hedge funds. What are they going to do? They're not making loans anymore and making money by loans. What they're doing is, for the first time, they're buying property, real estate, at 100% cash. There are a lot of vulture funds and hedge funds that are buying real estate for all cash instead of debt leveraging. So what you've done is you've turned the traditional real estate market since World War II upside down, and instead of don't put any of your own money, use borrowed money, now it's use only your own money, don't borrow from the banks. This is how the hedge funds and the cash-rich people are making their money as landlords. So what we're doing is going back from the 20th century finance capitalism back to the old 19th century landlord post-feudalism type of economy.
Well, let's talk about these mortgage economies that we have. Some of these private equity groups have been buying up a lot of property, and they've formed rental companies, and now they're actually IPOing these companies off. So are they seeing a downturn? Are they trying to get out before we see the next housing crash, perhaps?
Well, they're certainly trying to get out at the best price. They've been making 20%, 25% returns annually for the last few years. And the minimum investment, I'm told, is $5 million. They'd said if I wanted to come in, they'd give me $1 million, which I didn't have at the time. But they're very cash. Now that they've established a very high rate of earnings and buying from a very low price, they're trying to go public. hoping that people are going to project these high returns infinitely into the future and overpay. In other words, the hedge funds are cashing out.
Well, let's talk about interest rates, because this seems to be central to everything. Bernanke's talking about ending or at least tapering QE by the end of the year, and half of the FOMC voting members actually said that they should end it by the end of the year. And yet we have this disconnect because somehow this is somehow separate from interest rates. The Fed says that they're going to keep interest rates low into mid-2014, mid-2015. What is the Fed exactly trying to do here?
Well, it is trying to prepare the way to rise interest rates. And the best way to understand this is look at what happened from 1945 to 1980. When the United States and Europe emerged from World War II, interest rates were very low, about 1%. For 35 years, you had a bear market. You had interest rates rising steadily from just 1 or 2% all the way up to 20% by 1980. So during all those 35 years, there was a bear market. And the only money coming into Wall Street was largely from the pension funds, and you had a stock market bid up by pension fund capitalism. So right now, what you're doing is moving back towards the post-World War II period of rising interest rates. That means there's no free lunch from rising interest rates anymore. Bond prices cannot go up from here because interest rates cannot go down from here. So you have no way of making money through financial speculation anymore. The game is over. And so the Fed talks about somehow ending the giveaway to the banks, but it can't end the giveaway to the banks because if interest rates go up, then the banks are going to lose on their balance sheets. And one way or another, there's no exit from where we are except by writing down the existing debt overhead, and that's not what the Fed or the Treasury want to do.
Well, let's talk about that kind of endgame scenario. Of course, if you look at a chart of 30-year or 10-year bond yields, it's on the way down, and it can't stay at zero forever. It has to rise. But what happens when interest rates rise with respect to these banks? What is, I mean, from a regulatory perspective, from a monetary perspective, how are these banks going to survive this liquidity crisis that they're inevitably going to face?
Nobody's been able to answer that question.
I hope you can.
The economy's lost a lot of money in the debt overhead. Somebody has to pay. Now, either the economy pays or the banks. The bank's position is save us, not the economy. So the government says, okay, we're going to treat America essentially like the International Monetary Fund has treated third world countries for 30 years. We're going to impose austerity. The way of solving things, the only way that the banks think is to treat America like Greece, to treat it like Europe has treated Italy, to impose austerity and really tighten the screws. Nobody has found an alternative to impoverishing the economy to pay the banks. Something has to give.
Well, so let's talk about what might give here. I mean, before the bust, as asset prices were rising, families were taking on more and more debt. We've seen deleveraging since 2008. What's in store for the average person? Not necessarily the banks, but in terms for the average person.
Well, unemployment is still pretty high. The average family is pretty debt-ridden. Now you have student debt rising. A lot of families are drawing down, living off credit cards to break even. They're not able to get mortgage loans, so they can't raise their consumption that way. So essentially you have, for most families, the market's shrinking and employment opportunities are shrinking. And the employment opportunities that are opening are largely in the minimum wage, which President Obama has not made any move to raise. So it looks like the squeeze is on for most families.
Well, we had Warren Mosler on the other day, and he was talking about modern monetary theory. How does this fit into your view of how to correct the markets, how to correct our current economic situations? It's a very, if I have to look at it myself, it's kind of a very different way of looking at Keynesianism, but it's apparently something different. Can you just kind of break it down for our viewers?
The essence of modern monetary theory is now that we're not on gold anymore, the government can simply create money just like the Federal Reserve has created quantitative easing. It just prints the money electronically. It doesn't have to tax. That's what makes the American economy so much better and freer than the European economy. Europe doesn't have a central bank to essentially create the money to help its economies recover. The American economy has the Federal Reserve, and that can create enough money to spur recovery. The question is this money that the Federal Reserve is going to create, like the $13 trillion that it's given to the banks, going to help the banks recover, or is it going to help the economy recover? Well, President Obama says we can give $13 trillion to the banks, but in 40 years, we're going to have to spend $1 trillion for Social Security. That's awful. We can only give money to my campaign contributors on Wall Street, not a penny to the voters who elected me, not a penny to the economy. Now, Warren Mosler wants the government to create this money to spend into the economy, to recover employment, to spend on the real economy. But the Federal Reserve says, well, we're modern monetary theorists in a way. We are going to create the money like you want, Mr. Mosler, but we're only going to give it to our campaign contributors. We're only going to give the money we can create to the banks to buy their mortgages. We're not going to help the economy buy goods and services. We're not going to help raise living standards. We're only going to help the banks avoid losses because we at the Federal Reserve have our clients. That's the banks who own us, and we're run by the banks, independent from democratic control.
That was my interview with Michael Hudson, president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Trend Economics and author of Bubble and Beyond.